Sometimes we forget why we're here. It's easy to fall off track. These help us remember.
These battle scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Growing up I had a dream, something no one else could see. Tell me what it means when your faith is falling beneath your knees and you can't breathe. Everything you see reminds you of what you're not or something you won't be. You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they wanna do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shame. And that's the reason I'm staying up late, trying to find a way to escape the stereotypes this day and age is making me feel like the only way I'll be happy is getting signed to a label and making money through rapping. I wanna share my emotion because this world is attacking the very principle of life that lets the people be happy. If you don't have a reason to breathe, why even live? These battle scars are impressions of everything that it is.
Don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battle scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Now, if I had a voice that reached 100 million people, I'd tell them there's a reason that we're all created equal. Cause some decide to be great and some decide a sequel to an average person's life is simply what they want to be. So you make your decision, all I know is what I'm given. Won't define the life I lead or the way I dwell in existence. I've seen a greater image on the walls of where I'm living, and the words twisted and scripted remind me of something written. Faith is a gift that is given down to the people. If one believes it, one receives it. It's given if it is needed. Don't ever think you're trapped in a life that you never wanted. Your options are infinite, that's some mathematical logic. I'm not saying I'm a prophet, I'm speaking for what it's worth. These lyrics define my prayers and these battle scars on my church. Not saying I'm a prophet, I'm speaking for what it's worth. These lyrics define my prayers, these battle scars on my church.
Don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battle scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Well, hello everyone. I need to make sure I don't have lipstick on my teeth. Yep, no I don't. You know how paranoid I am. How are you doing? I hope you are doing well. And thank you, JJ, about the filing. I do think, I know that this kind of side conversation has to do with Michigan. We're not going to get into it too much. I think I got smudged eyeshadow too. No, I just got a little bit of dark circles. I've had some rough days. As those of you who've been following me on Twitter, even a little bit on Facebook, know. That's a little Michigan inside baseball there. Yeah, I'm very pleased with the filing. It very factually laid out and laid bare what utterly bad actors the opposing side is. I'm sorry, there's no one who can read these filings with an objective mind and not realize they're bad actors. Now, legal standards and things like that are a whole other thing. Judges are going to do what judges are going to do, but just dealing with human to human, bad actors, without a doubt. Anyway, that kind of got me off on a little bit of a tangent. Welcome to the channel. I know I've gotten some new watchers, either haters or lovers, by some of the shorts that I've done. And thank you for the super chat, Mike, instead of a ham. Though hams are always welcome. The address is down in the low bar. Let me set up this video a little bit. Yesterday, I did a... Well, before we do that, God, I'm so sorry. Let me take off this chat for 1 second. Because I keep forgetting about this. And it's coming up in about 2 weeks. No, less than 2 weeks. Anarchon. I'm the headline speaker at Anarchon. It's the first weekend in August. Go check it out at anarchon.com. If you're in that area, you can be in that area. It's kind of a mini pork fest because it's only a weekend. So if you don't think you could handle a week of camping, but could handle a weekend of camping with a bunch of hardcore libertarians, come to Anarchon. If you do come, please be sure to say hi. Now that we did that, because I keep forgetting, and I don't want to forget that. It's such an honor to be asked to be the headline speaker. And I see, let me put the comments back up. I did not watch Decentralized Revolution tonight, so I don't know how the conversation was on reparations. Let me set this video up. That's a good segue into it. What's my position on reparations? As they're commonly understood, I'm against them. So let's not start the video thinking that because my title is refuting a bad anti-libertarian argument, that means that I am for them. No, what I'm for is good arguments. I'm against bad arguments. And I am against reparations for various reasons, but that is not the topic of this video. The topic of this video is refuting what I consider not only a bad argument, but an anti-libertarian one. The animal H. Reardon in the Anarchon logo is the honey badger, because honey badger don't give a shit. And I think I got lipstick on my teeth now. Can't tell. You guys will tell me. So this is part 2. If you're wondering where part 1 is, I'm going to stick it up wherever YouTube puts those little title prompt bars in post-production. If they'll let me link to it, it's a Rumble video. The reason why I did part 1 on Rumble is it got a bit spicy. I wasn't so sure it would be suitable for YouTube. But part 2, I felt would be. And the reason why I'm doing part 2, I'm not trying to beat this subject to death. I realized that I forgot a major point I wanted to cover in part 1. So that's the only, which now turns out to be part 1. And that's the only reason I'm doing part 2, because I think it's important. So let me summarize where I'm going with this part 2. I had almost dealt with the theory, or I kind of sort of dealt with the theory of alternate worlds in part 1, in which I said, so the bad argument in a nutshell is you're paid in full, basically. That modern Black people today are better off being born in America than they would be if they were born today in Africa, because most areas in Africa are deeply impoverished and many are third world. And to me, that argument is just a bad argument, but it's also an anti-libertarian one. Because if reparations are correct, it doesn't matter if when the person did you wrong, it had this unintended side effect of in some way making you better off. Those two things are entirely separate issues, and it's not libertarian to combine them. If somebody robs you, and because of that robbery, some millionaire takes pity on you and gifts you a house, that doesn't mean the robber did you a favor. The two things are completely separate and need to be kept completely separate. So it is morally, and in the subset of morality that deals with justice, which is what libertarianism deals with, it is irrelevant. It's morally and justly irrelevant to the argument of whether or not reparations are correct, that somebody, in your opinion, is better off born here. And where I'm going is the in your opinion part, and still dealing with the alternative universe, kind of mining the subjunctive, the William Lane Craig of dealing, kind of like a Molinistic view, I guess, here, of the badness of this argument. In order to say, well, first of all, the idea that someone is is better off than they would be in some alternative scenario where they were born in the country of their ancestors is nonsensical, because that person probably would never have been born to begin with, because a different chain of events, and the fact that any of us exist is like very random and such, well, random, but not exactly random, but it's the sequence of a lot of events that all have to take place in a certain way, and the chances of them happening in exactly that same way again in an entirely different country is probably not going to happen. The particular sperm and egg that joined to create you probably would not join in any other set of circumstances. So you are a miracle in that way. But let's even pretend like you can do that. Where I was going with is a very Austrian economics way of looking at it, in that you cannot place values arbitrarily on things for other people. As I said in the other video, in assuming that somebody is better off, you are assuming that they prioritize the comforts of a first world country to other values that they may have. There are other values that they may have you may find completely irrational, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that they were damaged, and it is in their judgment how they are made whole when you're dealing with this argument. They may not believe, if they knew all of the totality of the circumstances, that they are in fact better off. Now, I know some people might think that sounds completely nuts. So I'm going to give you an actual real world example to illustrate my point. Most of us would rather be born in a first world wealthy country than a third world impoverished country. But that is just taking one set of values, and that is material wealth. But many people believe, you might not, but many people believe we are more than material beings. And material things are not the only thing they prioritize. Even for people who don't believe in things like a spirit or God or anything like that, there are still other things that you might prioritize. You might prioritize the well-being of the homeland of your ancestors and feel that you would have been better off if everybody in that line of your family had been born over there to improve the country, and perhaps they would not be such a third world country, whatever. I know we're dealing with a continent, but people would have come from a specific country. Or perhaps it would have been more value to you to have your line of ancestry be close to the land from which you sprung, and to have your children and your ancestors all grow up in that culture, which is warp and woof of who you are, rather than being transplanted into a foreign land. You cannot place those values for other people. So as I said, I'm going to give you a real life example. Now, this is coming from a Christian context, but I'm a Christian, so I do that. But I think even people who aren't Christians, even if you might think that the story is a little nutty, you'll at least understand how people can have different values, and my hypotheticals really aren't so crazy. And the example I'm going to use, and if you're a Christian, you will have heard of this person. It's a famous Christian speaker and author by the name of Joni Eareckson Tada. Joni Eareckson Tada is a quadriplegic. She became a quadriplegic from diving, I believe it was in a lake, into an unknown, shallow area, and she snapped her neck. I think she was 14. No, it was right after high school, excuse me. So teenager still, and snapped her neck. Now, part of her story is that she grew up in a very Christian family. And as she was growing up, she would go to Christian retreats and things like that and hear about what she believed, because she's also a Christian, that God required of us as disciples. And she felt like she wasn't living up to those standards. And she first became really convicted of that when she was 14 years old, and then went through high school and all of that. And then as graduating high school, that feeling kind of returned. And I am doing some paraphrasing here, and I've heard her speak on this several times. And the story's always mostly the same, but sometimes there's some little details. So if you say, oh, I never heard that detail, I've listened to her quite a bit, and she sometimes adds different details. And she remembers, reaffirming her faith coming out of high school and wanting to be closer to God and try to live up to these very lofty calling that she believed that we had as Christians. And she says she remembers praying to God, God, make me closer to you. And she says in one story that God answered her prayer. And he answered her prayer by sending her a broken neck. Now that can seem shocking to some people, but she believes in the trials and tribulations that came from this disability, that she became closer to God and values that closeness to God, she said, more than 1,000,000 days of walking. Now that is hardcore, and you don't have to agree with her values. But if you put her in some alternate viewing chamber where in this future, your sister would have warned you not to jump off of that, I think it was a pier or something like that, jump off of whatever it was into the shallow, or in this one where it happened. Knowing everything that you know now, what would you have chosen? And if you take her at her word, she would have chosen the one where she became a quadriplegic, because she believes the value that she is getting through life's trials is going to yield an internal and eternal reward. Now, again, I understand atheists think that is nuts. Some Christians might even think. But it just goes to show you a very famous real-life example of how someone valued the suffering over what we might think of as a better life. Very few of us would choose to be a quadriplegic, and she didn't choose it. It happened to her. But in hindsight, from at least what she says, she would have chosen that if she knew the two alternatives. So how can we say, merely based upon material things, that any person today might think that they are better off? There are people who are missionaries who are born in this country into fabulous wealth and choose to give up everything and go elsewhere. So I'm not arguing for some kind of religious view or some kind of holier than thou pious view that, I'm just arguing for the reality that you don't get to set those values on other people. You don't get to say how many, there's a really good article called, it's by Thomas Knapp, called Without a Net. It's something like Calculation versus Compromise, I think is what it's called. Let me see if I can find it. If I can't find it quickly, I'll just try to summarize what I remember about it. But it was dealing with libertarian pragmatists, net calculation or something, I think it's called. And I can't find it easily, but if I can, I'll stick it in the show notes or maybe up in the upper bar. But in this article, Tom Knapp is arguing that you can't deal with the concept of overall net reduction in aggression. There's no such thing as a net total of aggression. There is only individual aggression. So some people will argue for things like UBI, claiming that it will reduce net aggression because it will eliminate the IRS and it will eliminate that. Well, you don't get to make those value judgments for other people. There's no such thing as net aggression. There is only individual aggression. So in this article, Tom Knapp says, well, if we're going to start dealing with net aggression, would you rather have one murder or how many rapes? How many rapes is just slightly below one murder? Well, you can't make that calculation. It's impossible. and what people value and how they view themselves better off and not to, is deeply personal. And I think we are doing a great disservice to our humanity and our empathy when we downplay, and this is not an argument for reparations. Now what I'm going to make an argument for is being a decent, empathetic person. When you downplay the effects of intergenerational trauma. Do you not think because of what the government did to us in the COVID regime that there's going to be intergenerational trauma and intergenerational effects of what kids went through? And that was just a couple periods. And we're not talking about kidnapping people and putting them into brutal slavery. Let's not downplay what actually happened. And that doesn't mean that all of us today have to pay for it. But it does mean if we're going to be decent people, don't say something. Not only is it an anti-libertarian argument, not only is it a bad argument, it's like a just peak no empathy argument to say to somebody, well, shut up about reparations unless you want to take your booty back to Africa. Like, that is just you're not a good person if you make that argument. And when I say that, okay, that is hyperbole. I have friends who made that argument. I don't think they're bad people overall, but when they made that argument, they were not a good person at that time. And they really need to check themselves before they wreck themselves. Because really, there are some things that, come on, I shouldn't have to tell you that, and no, this isn't self-censorship or whatever. You know, it's like I shouldn't have to tell you that, and some people will say this is wrong, I guess. Maybe this is just my value system. This, in Christianity, here I am again in Christianity, there was this apologist that I was listening to that was talking about, is all, and I've dealt with this on another show, is all deception wrong? And I did a whole show on this, but he talked about the virtuous or merciful white lie. If someone is like dying, and let's say they were in an accident, okay, and their dog was in the car with them, and their dog died too, and you knew this person loved their dog, and they're about to die, and they ask you, did my dog make it? Will you take care of my dog for me? You want to know what? Don't pain that person in their last moments. Tell them that their fucking dog made it. I shouldn't have to tell people that. Anyway, let's try to be a little bit more like non-Vulcan and realize that we are dealing with real people that have real, you know, we tend to prioritize logic over feels, and I do think those two things go hand in hand. If you don't have feelings, you're not a human being. And if all you have is feelings, you're not a full human being. A full human being requires both. And I think we really need to master that a little bit better. But in any event, it's not only a bad argument, it's an anti-libertarian argument. Hopefully I'll remember to put the links up here. If you stay tuned, I've got probably 2 more shows planned tonight because I need to catch up on some things, and this one wasn't really planned. But I hope that you, even if we don't end up agreeing, as I said, there's at least understanding. Understanding is where, you know, souls connect. All right. I'll see you in a few minutes. All right. Bye-bye.
Given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be in a in a business.